We live in an era where nearly anything can be created on a screen. Entire worlds are generated in an instant, designed to look as surreal and impossible as our minds will allow. But the most unimaginable landscapes aren't built. They are born. Over millions of years, the tropics of our planet have quietly carved out environments so strange, so perfectly painted, that they challenge our basic understanding of what is real. Over the next hour, we are going to explore the forgotten corners of the Earth. 25 distinct environments that look like a mirage, but actually exist. If you were to sit down and paint a fantasy world, you might sketch out something exactly like this. Hundreds of perfectly round, identical hills rolling on forever. It almost looks too uniform, too precise. But this is not a trick of the eye. We are on the island of Bohol in the Philippines, and out here, spread across the humid, quiet plains, are the chocolate hills. There are over 1,000 of them. Some are just 30 feet tall, while others tower well over 100 feet. When you stand at an overlook and feel the warm, heavy breeze coming off the Philippine Sea, you just see them stretching on, fading into the horizon. Local legend says these mounds were left behind by two angry giants. The story goes that they spent days throwing boulders and sand at each other in a massive fight. When they finally exhausted themselves and made peace, they walked away, leaving the island in a mess. The geological reality, though, is just as strange. Millions of years ago, this entire area was completely underwater. These hills are actually made of marine limestone, built from the remains of ancient coral reefs. Over countless centuries, tectonic plates pushed the ocean floor up into the open air. Then, heavy tropical rains went to work, slowly washing away the softer rock and carving out the deep valleys between the hills. What we are looking at right now is the weathered skeleton of an ancient, prehistoric sea. For most of the year, these domes are covered in thick, vibrant green grass. But when the dry season hits, the tropical sun fiercely bakes the earth. The vegetation dries out, and the hills shift into a rich, dusty brown. Suddenly, the landscape looks like endless rows of massive chocolate drops scattered across the earth. It is a slow, quiet transformation driven by the seasons. But while the hills of Bohol wait for the dry season to change their color, our next stop plays by completely different rules. We are heading to a violent, restless crater where the water changes color entirely on its own, and scientists still cannot predict when it will happen next. We usually think of mountains as permanent, solid, quiet stone, frozen in time. But high up in the clouds of the Indonesian island of Flores, Mount Kelimutu refuses to sit still. When you make the dark, early morning hike up to its summit, the air is thin and cold. The sharp scent of sulfur drifts on the wind, a quiet reminder that you're standing directly on top of an active volcano. And then the sun comes up, burning away the thick morning fog. Down below, carved into the peak, are three massive crater lakes. They sit side by side, separated only by a thin, fragile wall of rock. Yet they share almost nothing in common. One lake might be a bright, milky turquoise. Right next door, the second lake could be a deep, inky black. And the third, it might be the color of dark, rusted iron. If you come back a year later, the turquoise lake might have turned blood red. The black one could be pale green. They change their colors entirely on their own, with no warning and no predictable pattern. For the local Leo people, this mountain is a sacred place. They believe Kelimutu is the final resting ground for the dead. According to their traditions, the spirits of the young go to one lake, the old go to another, and the wicked go to the third. When the waters change color, the locals say the spirits are restless. Scientists see a different kind of restlessness. Deep beneath these craters, volcanic vents continuously push gases up through the rock. These gases react with heavy minerals in the water, like iron and manganese. Whenever the volcano shifts its activity underneath the surface, it changes the chemical balance in the water above. The lakes are basically three giant natural chemistry experiments reacting to the shifting earth below. It is a raw, open landscape, completely exposed to the sky above. But what if a landscape wanted to hide? For our next stop, we are leaving the high volcanic peaks for the coast of Mexico to find a perfectly pristine beach that is completely invisible from the ocean, locked away inside a hollow island. When you picture a perfect beach, you probably imagine a long stretch of sand rolling out to meet the open ocean. But off the coast of Mexico, the Marianas Islands hide a secret that breaks the rules. From the water, this small chain of rocky, uninhabited islands looks completely ordinary. You hear the heavy crash of the Pacific waves against the sharp limestone cliffs. The hot sun beats down on the dry, scrubby rocks. There is no shore in sight. But if you know exactly where to go and time the tides just right, you can swim through a dark, narrow tunnel carved directly into the cliffside. When you come out on the other side, the rock opens up. You emerge onto Playa del Amor, the hidden beach. It is a perfect, sun-drenched circle of white sand and clear water, completely enclosed within a massive, hollowed-out cavern. You are standing on a pristine coastline, but instead of looking out at the horizon, you're looking straight up through a massive, gaping hole in the rock ceiling to the blue sky above. The strangest part about this hidden sanctuary is how it was created. It is not entirely the work of nature. In the early 1900s, these islands were completely empty. The Mexican government decided to use them as a site for military bomb testing. It is widely believed that a massive explosion weakened the limestone roof of this specific cave, causing it to collapse in on itself. Over the decades that followed, the ocean tides slowly washed pure white sand into the crater, turning a site of destruction into one of the most secluded beaches on Earth. Today, the explosions are gone. The only sounds you hear are the gentle echo of the water splashing against the cave walls and the calls of seabirds circling the crater opening high above. It feels like a private, locked-away world. Here, the water is a calm, predictable blue. But our journey is taking us south, deep into the dense, humid jungles of Colombia. We are searching for an isolated river that refuses to settle for just one color. A river that, for a few fleeting weeks a year, completely changes the rules of nature. Rivers are supposed to follow the rules. They run clear, they run green, or they run a thick, muddy brown. But deep inside the isolated jungles of Colombia, there is a river that refuses to choose just one. To find it, you have to travel deep into the Serranía de la Macarena. The air here is thick and humid. The calls of tropical birds echo through the dense canopy. You follow the sound of rushing water over ancient, pale rocks, and then the riverbed simply erupts. This is Caño Cristales. Looking down into the fast-moving current, you see brilliant, vivid streaks of crimson red, bright yellow, deep blue, and dark green. It looks like liquid watercolor flowing over the stones. It feels entirely unnatural. But the secret behind this river is actually a delicate, living thing. The vibrant colors come from a highly unique, fragile aquatic plant called Macarenia clavigera. These delicate plants cling tightly to the submerged rocks, completely covering the river floor. But here's the catch. You cannot just show up any time of year and expect to see this canvas of color. The river only puts on this display for a few short weeks. It happens during a highly specific window, caught perfectly between the wet and the dry seasons. If the heavy rains come and the water rises too high, the current moves too fast. The sun cannot pierce the surface, and the plants stay hidden in the dark. But if the water drops too low, the harsh Colombian sun simply burns the plants, turning them dull and brown. The environment has to be perfectly, flawlessly balanced. And when it is, for just a brief passing moment, the jungle river transforms into a flowing piece of art. Water has a strange way of bringing a landscape to life. Here, it paints the jungle red, but thousands of miles away, on the sweeping coast of Brazil, water does something even more impossible. We are heading to a barren, blindingly white desert that is somehow hiding thousands of perfectly clear freshwater pools. If you drop someone in the middle of a desert, they expect sand, endless, dry, blistering heat. When you stand on the edge of the Lençóis Maranhenses in northern Brazil, that is exactly what you see. Miles and miles of blinding white sand dunes rolling endlessly toward the horizon. But this landscape is lying to you. The sun here is intense. The wind continuously whips the fine powdery grains across your ankles as you hike up the steep, shifting face of a dune. It feels exactly like the Sahara. But when you finally reach the crest and look over the edge, you don't see an empty wasteland. You see water, thousands of perfectly clear, bright blue and emerald green lagoons. sitting right in the bottom of the sandy valleys. Technically, this is not a desert at all. Every year, massive tropical rainstorms sweep in from the Atlantic Ocean, dropping huge amounts of water onto the dunes. But instead of soaking deep into the earth, the rain hits a solid hidden layer of impermeable rock lying just beneath the sand. The water has nowhere to go. So it pools up, creating an impossible oasis that stretches for hundreds of square miles. The strangest part of this temporary world is what lives inside it. If you put on a mask and dive into these pools, you will actually find fish swimming around. For half the year, these valleys are bone-dry sand baked by the sun. But when the rains finally return, fish eggs that have been sitting dormant, buried deep in the mud, suddenly hatch. The desert literally comes alive almost overnight. It is a stunning, fragile environment that only exists for a few short months before the dry season returns and the sun burns the water away. But while the lagoons in Brazil vanish into thin air, our next location traps water permanently. We are flying across the world to the dense forests of Laos, searching for an ancient staircase of stone that turns a roaring river into perfectly still, milky blue pools. Water usually tears through a jungle. It cuts deep, violently carving out the dirt and stone as it rushes toward the sea. But hidden in the thick, humid forests of northern Laos, there is a river that doesn't carve the rock. It actually builds it. When you walk the dirt trails just outside the ancient city of Luang Prabang, you don't hear the violent, deafening roar you expect from a massive waterfall. Instead, you hear a soft, constant trickling. The heavy jungle canopy overhead blocks out the harsh sun, casting long, cool shadows on the forest floor. And then, through the dark green leaves, you see Kuang Falls. It is not just one steep drop. It is an intricate, sprawling staircase of pale stone. The water tumbles gently down a towering main cascade, and then spills over dozens of perfectly curved, shallow terraces. And the water itself is completely surreal. It is a pale, milky, glowing turquoise. It almost looks thick, like someone poured paint right into the stream. That ghostly color, and those perfect stone steps, are a quiet, geographical magic trick. The spring water flowing down from the mountains is heavily loaded with a mineral called calcium carbonate. As the water washes over the debris on the forest floor, those minerals instantly stick to the surface. Over centuries, these tiny deposits harden into a type of limestone called travertine. The river is literally building its own dams. Every second of every day, the water is actively constructing those curved rims, trapping itself into perfectly still, glowing pools before slowly spilling over into the next one. It is a beautiful, peaceful illusion created entirely by chemistry and time. But water can create far darker illusions too. For our next stop, we are leaving the quiet jungle and flying out over the deep ocean off the coast of Africa to search for a massive, terrifying rift where the sea itself appears to be draining down into a bottomless, black abyss. Water is supposed to follow gravity. It falls from the clouds, rushes down the mountains, and eventually, it levels out and rests in the sea. The ocean is the end of the line. But if you take a helicopter flight off the southwestern coast of Mauritius, you will see something that breaks that fundamental rule. Up here, the loud hum of the rotors fades into the background. You feel the warm, salty breeze rushing through the open cabin window. You look down at the bright, calm, turquoise water of the Indian Ocean, expecting to see ordinary coral reefs. Instead, the ocean floor suddenly tears open, right beneath the waves. You see what looks like a massive, churning waterfall. It looks as if the sea itself is violently pulling away, draining down into a dark, bottomless trench. Your eyes are lying to you. This is not a waterfall. It is a massive, incredibly perfect optical illusion. To understand it, you have to look at the towering rock standing on the shore nearby. It is called Le Morne Brabant. In the 18th and 19th centuries, runaway slaves used this jagged mountain as a hidden refuge, isolating themselves above a terrifying and deceptive sea. The island of Mauritius is actually a giant, relatively young volcano sitting on an elevated underwater shelf. Right off the coast, that shallow shelf abruptly ends, dropping roughly 2.5 miles straight down into the black, unexplored oceanic abyss. What you are seeing from the air is not water falling into the deep. It is sand. Powerful, relentless underwater currents are constantly sweeping the bright, white coastal silt off the shallow shelf and pushing it over the edge of the dark drop-off. As the heavy sand streaks down the underwater cliff face, it perfectly mimics the movement and flow of cascading water. It is nothing but sand, gravity, and shadows, tricking the human brain into seeing an impossible abyss. But while the sands of Mauritius constantly fall into the deep ocean, our next destination pushes violently in the exact opposite direction. We are leaving the sea behind and heading deep into the wild jungles of South America to scale the sheer vertical walls of an ancient island in the sky. When we think of an isolated island, we picture a small speck of land surrounded by thousands of miles of empty ocean. But the most isolated islands on Earth are not surrounded by water. They are surrounded by air, deep in the remote Gran Sabana of Venezuela. The thick jungle canopy stretches out like an endless green sea. And then, tearing straight through the morning mist, is a sheer vertical wall of black rock. It rises over 1,000 feet straight up, topping out in a perfectly flat plateau entirely hidden in the clouds. This is Mount Roraima. For the indigenous Piman people, this towering monolith is sacred. They call these flat-topped mountains tepuis, which translates to House of the Gods, according to their oldest traditions. Roraima is actually a remnant of a mythical giant tree that once held all the fruits and vegetables in the world. Legends say that when the tree was chopped down, it unleashed a massive flood, leaving only this petrified stump behind. The geological reality is just as ancient. The sandstone you touch here is over 2 billion years old. It is a leftover fragment of Gondwana, the ancient supercontinent, perfectly preserved while the rest of the Earth shifted and broke apart. Below scaling these sheer cliffs is a brutal, exhausting climb through dense fog and heavy rain. But when you finally pull yourself over the edge and stand on the summit, you are stepping onto another planet. The landscape is a harsh, silent maze of damp, blackened stone. There are sprawling valleys filled entirely with sharp quartz crystals. But the real secret of Roraima is the life that survives here. Because these vertical walls completely cut off the summit from the jungle floor millions of years ago, evolution up here simply took a different path. Nearly half the plants and animals on this plateau exist nowhere else on the globe. There are strange carnivorous pitcher plants that feed on insects caught in the mist. There are tiny primitive black toads that never learn to hop. Instead, they simply pull their arms in and roll down the rocky hills like pebbles to escape danger. It is a living, breathing time capsule, floating high above the rest of the world. It is an ecosystem built closer to the stars than the soil. But our journey is about to drop back down to Earth and plunge directly through the crust. We are traveling north, deep into the humid jungles of the Yucatan Peninsula, searching for a hidden cavern that leads to an ancient stone altar, bathed in a single piercing ray of sunlight. Usually, if you want to find the sun, you look up to the open sky. But in the dense, flat jungles of Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, the most dramatic light on Earth is buried deep underground, above ground. The jungle heat is heavy and suffocating, but as you walk down a steep, narrow set of stone stairs, that heat completely disappears. The air instantly turns cool and damp. You can smell wet earth and ancient rock. The only sound is the slow, steady drip of water echoing off the cavern walls. And then, you step out into the dark. You are standing inside Cenote Suytun. It is a massive, perfectly circular limestone cavern. Right in the center of the dark water sits a flat, man-made stone walkway. And shooting straight down from a tiny, natural hole in the ceiling is a single, blinding pillar of sunlight. It hits the center of the stone platform like a spotlight on an empty stage. It feels theatrical, almost intentional. For the ancient Maya, places like this were not just geological quirks. The entire Yucatan Peninsula is basically a massive shelf of porous limestone, with no rivers above ground. Over millions of years, acidic rainwater slowly ate away at the rock beneath the soil, creating thousands of these hollow underground chambers. The Maya called them Cenote, which translates to sacred well. Because this was their only source of fresh water, they believed these sinkholes were literally the portals to Xibalba, the dark, terrifying underworld of the gods. The name Suytun itself actually means center stone. When you stand on that platform surrounded by absolute darkness, with that single beam of light warming your face, it is very easy to understand why they thought this place was a doorway to another world. Here in the dark, water carved out a sacred hidden sanctuary. But what happens to a landscape when the water simply dries up? We are leaving the damp caves of Mexico and traveling to a brutally hot, isolated rock in the Arabian Sea. We are searching for an island so cut off from the rest of the planet, even the trees bleed. If you want to know what the Earth looked like millions of years ago, you can't just dig in the dirt. You have to find a place the rest of the world completely forgot about. Out in the harsh, choppy waters of the Arabian Sea, roughly 200 miles off the coast of Yemen, sits a brutal piece of rock. When you step onto the island of Socotra, the first thing you notice is the wind. It is hot, heavy, and carries the sharp smell of salt. The ground is dry and cracked, and scattered across this dusty red landscape are trees that simply should not exist. They look like giant inside-out umbrellas or flying saucers made of tangled, thick green veins. These are the dragon's blood trees. They look completely alien, but their strange shape is actually a brilliant survival mechanism. It rarely ever rains here. Instead, these trees use their wide, flat canopies to catch the thick morning sea mist. The moisture condenses on the leaves and runs down the branches, funneled perfectly down the trunk directly to the roots below. But the strangest thing about this tree is what happens when you scratch the bark. It bleeds a thick, dark red sap, immediately oozes out of the cut. Thousands of years ago, ancient Roman gladiators used to buy this resin from desert merchants, rubbing it on their skin before entering the arena. They believed it was the literal blood of dragons, and that it would give them superhuman strength and instantly heal their wounds. Today, locals still use it as a powerful dye and medicine. This strange tree, along with a third of all the plant life on this island, exists nowhere else in the universe. That is because Socotra tore away from the mainland of Africa over 34 million years ago. It floated out into the ocean and sat there in absolute isolation. The punishing climate forced the plants and animals to adapt in entirely bizarre ways just to stay alive. It is a dry, silent world baked by a ruthless sun. But life does not always need the sun to put on a show. We are leaving the dry desert winds behind and flying west deep into the warm, dark nights of the Caribbean to find a quiet lagoon where the water itself glows in the dark. When the sun goes down, the ocean usually turns pitch black. It becomes a heavy, silent void. But on the tiny island of Vieques, just off the coast of Puerto Rico, the water doesn't go to sleep. It wakes up. To experience it, you have to push a small kayak out into Mosquito Bay on a moonless night. The air is warm and still, smelling faintly of salt and the thick tangled roots of the mangrove trees. At first, you can barely see your own hands in front of you. But then, you dip your paddle into the water. Instantly, the dark surface shatters into an electric neon blue light. Every time you move, every time a fish darts past your boat, the water leaves a glowing, swirling trail of light. If you scoop the water up in your hands, it glitters as it slips through your fingers, like liquid stars. It feels like magic, but hundreds of years ago, Spanish colonizers thought it was something much darker. When the Spanish first arrived in the 17th century, they were terrified of this glowing bay. They believed the bright blue light was the work of the devil. To stop what they thought was evil magic from washing out into the open ocean, they dropped massive boulders into the narrow channel that connected the bay to the sea. But their plan completely backfired. By blocking the exit, they accidentally created the perfect calm trap for the real source of the light. Millions of microscopic, single-celled organisms called dinoflagellates. These tiny creatures do not glow just to be beautiful. It is actually a panic response. Whenever the water is disturbed, they fire off a tiny chemical flash of light. It is a biological burglar alarm designed to startle predators or to attract even bigger fish to come and eat whatever is trying to attack them. Because those ancient Spanish boulders slowed down the ocean tides, Mosquito Bay now holds the highest concentration of these glowing organisms anywhere on the planet. It is a brilliant, fragile light show, dancing right on the surface, but light can only reach so far. For our next chapter, we are leaving the glowing shallows behind and sailing out into the middle of the bright Caribbean Sea to look straight down into a perfectly round, dark portal that drops hundreds of feet into the cold abyss. Most coral reefs are bursting with light. They are shallow, chaotic, and constantly in motion. But roughly 40 miles off the coast of Belize, right in the middle of a brightly lit, shallow reef, the ocean floor simply drops out. When you fly over Lighthouse Reef, the water below is a brilliant, clear turquoise. You can easily see the sharp outlines of the coral. You can even spot the shadows of reef sharks hunting in the shallows. And then without warning, the pale sand abruptly stops. You find yourself staring down into a perfect dark navy circle, 1,000 feet wide. It looks like a massive open eye. It looks as if someone punched a hole straight through the crust of the earth. This is the Great Blue Hole. When you strap on a tank and dive into it, the bright, warm water at the surface quickly fades. The light turns a deep, heavy blue. The temperature drops sharply. And the deeper you sink into the cavern, the quieter the ocean gets. But the most fascinating thing about this marine sinkhole is that it was not created by the ocean at all. It was actually built on completely dry land, tens of thousands of years ago. During the last ice age, sea levels across the globe were drastically lower. This massive abyss was just an ordinary dry limestone cave system. Scuba divers have actually found massive stalactites hanging from the rock walls, hundreds of feet beneath the waves. Those massive stone formations can only grow in the open air, forming drop by drop over thousands of years. When the ice age finally ended, the glaciers melted. The ocean slowly rose, quietly flooded the cave, and eventually caused the massive stone roof to collapse in on itself. Today, it sits as a dark, flooded tomb from a forgotten era. It is a striking example of the ocean swallowing the land whole. But on the other side of the world, the shoreline is painted in an entirely different light. We are leaving the dark depths of Central America and heading to the distant coast of Australia to walk on a beach made of a sand so pure and so white, it does not even feel like Earth. Most beaches are just a messy collection of whatever the ocean happens to leave behind. Crushed shells, broken coral, ground-up rocks. But off the northeastern coast of Australia, there is a beach that doesn't seem to belong to its environment at all. When you step off a boat onto Whitehaven Beach, on the edge of the Whitsunday Islands, the first thing you notice is the sound as you walk. The ground actually squeaks beneath your bare feet. And even under the brutal, heavy heat of the Australian sun, the sand stays perfectly cool to the touch. That is because this is not normal sand. It is 98% pure silica. It is so fine and so brilliantly white that it feels like powdered sugar. When the shallow, clear ocean tide slowly rolls in, it mixes with the white powder, creating these massive, swirling streaks of bright blue and white. From above, it looks exactly like melting, liquid marble. But the real mystery of Whitehaven Beach is how this pure sand got here in the first place. Silica is usually born from quartz rock. Yet, if you search this entire island, and all the islands around it, you won't find a single trace of quartz. Geologists are still slightly baffled by it. The best theory is that over millions of years, ancient prevailing ocean currents dragged this incredibly pure sand from completely different continents, slowly trapping it all in this one specific quiet bay. It is a pristine, glowing masterpiece, built entirely by the random shifting currents of the sea. But a landscape doesn't always have to be shaped by nature to look completely surreal. We are leaving the bright, flat coasts of Australia and heading deep into the steep, humid jungles of Indonesia to walk through a vibrant green valley that was meticulously carved, step by human hands. When you look at a wild rainforest, it usually looks entirely chaotic. Vines tangle together, roots tear through the dirt, and every single plant fights desperately for a patch of sunlight. But in the middle of Bali, Indonesia, a steep, wild jungle valley was brought into absolute perfect order. If you arrive at the Tegalalang Valley just after sunrise, the morning air is thick and heavy. You can smell wet mud, sweet wood smoke, and crushed palm leaves. As the fog slowly lifts, you don't see a rough, untamed mountain. Instead, you see sweeping, flawless staircases, rows upon rows of vivid electric green rice paddies, carved directly into the vertical slopes. It looks like a giant piece of landscape art sculpted by a very patient hand. But this valley is actually a massive living machine. To keep these steep terraces from washing away, and to keep the rice perfectly flooded, the local farmers rely on an ancient water management system called the subak. It was invented over 1,000 years ago, long before modern engineering or electric pumps. But the subak is not just about farming. It is deeply tied to Balinese Hinduism. The locals believe that water is a sacred gift from the gods. So before a single drop hits these fields, it starts high up the mountain at a water temple. Priests bless the water, and then it flows down through an incredibly complex network of canals, tunnels, and bamboo pipes. It is shared equally, terrace by terrace, neighbor by neighbor, all the way down the valley. It is a masterpiece of gravity and human cooperation, perfectly balanced with nature. During the day, these shallow, flooded steps catch the sunlight like thousands of tiny mirrors, reflecting the bright blue sky above. But mirrors in nature can play entirely different tricks. When the dark finally falls, we are leaving the bright green valleys of Bali and traveling to the remote, breaking waves of the Maldives, to find a quiet shoreline that steals its light directly from the stars. We spend our whole lives looking up to find the stars. But on a tiny, isolated strip of sand in the Indian Ocean, you have to look down. When night falls on Vadhu Island in the Maldives, the horizon completely vanishes. The dark ocean blends seamlessly into the black sky. You stand on the soft, powdery sand, feeling the warm, heavy breeze coming off the water. You listen to the gentle hiss of the waves rolling onto the shore, and as the water crashes against the sand, it shatters into thousands of glowing electric blue sparks. It looks as though the night sky has physically fallen into the sea. This is the Sea of Stars, like the glowing bays of the Caribbean. This shoreline is illuminated by microscopic plankton. When the ocean currents push them against the hard sand, the physical stress triggers a sudden chemical reaction inside their tiny bodies. But the true marvel here is not just that they glow, it is how they do it. The chemical they produce is called luciferin. When it mixes with oxygen in the water, it creates what scientists call cold light. When we turn on a standard light bulb in our homes, a massive amount of the energy is completely wasted as heat. But these tiny floating organisms are different. They convert nearly 100% of their energy directly into pure light without generating a single drop of heat. It is a level of absolute efficiency that human engineers have never been able to recreate. For a few quiet hours, the beach simply pulses, a brilliant, silent rhythm matching the beating of the tide. But while the shores of the Maldives light up the dark, our next destination prefers to hide in the heavy morning fog. We are leaving the open ocean behind and sailing into a quiet Emerald Bay in Vietnam to navigate a massive silent maze of jagged stone towers rising straight out of the deep. Imagine trying to navigate a maze where the walls are made of solid rock and the floor is the open ocean. When you sail into the Gulf of Tonkin in northern Vietnam, that is exactly what you face. Early in the morning, Ha Long Bay is usually swallowed by a heavy pale mist. The air is damp and cool. You can smell the sharp salt of the sea, mixed with the faint sweet scent of burning incense from the old wooden boats. For a moment, all you see is a wall of fog. But as the morning sun slowly burns through the haze, the dark silhouettes begin to appear. First one, then 10, then thousands. Massive, jagged limestone pillars shoot straight up out of the deep emerald water. They are heavily draped in thick, dark green jungle vines. There are over 1,600 of these islands scattered across the bay, sitting perfectly still in the quiet, protected water. The local name, Ha Long, translates to the Bay of the Descending Dragon. According to an ancient Vietnamese legend, the country was once under constant attack from invaders crossing the sea. To protect the people, the gods sent a family of dragons down from the sky. As the dragons flew over the bay, they began spitting massive emeralds and pieces of jade into the water. The moment these jewels hit the sea, they instantly turned into towering walls of solid stone, crushing the enemy ships and blocking off the coast forever. Geology tells a much slower but equally dramatic story. These islands are the result of 500 million years of endless, quiet erosion. This entire area was once a massive, flat plateau of solid limestone. Over countless centuries, heavy acidic tropical rains and powerful ocean currents slowly dissolved the softer rock, washing the crust of the earth away completely. What you see standing today are just the stubborn, hardened survivors, the towering bones of an ancient landscape. It is a quiet, atmospheric world where thousands of ancient islands crowd together in the mist. But what if a landscape prefers to stand completely alone? We are leaving the crowded, foggy waters of Vietnam and sailing halfway around the world to the bright, warm Caribbean to find two massive, solitary volcanic spires that dominate the skyline like towering giants. Mountains usually take their time. They build up slowly, rolling from gentle, sloping foothills into towering peaks. But on the southwestern coast of St. Lucia, the Earth did not take its time. It simply erupted straight out of the ocean. As you approach the island by boat, the horizon is completely dominated by two massive triangular shadows. They are the pitons, Gros Piton and Petit Piton. They rise over 2,000 feet, almost perfectly vertical, launching themselves directly from the deep blue waters of the Caribbean Sea. When you get close, you feel the sheer scale of them. The air is thick with the scent of salty sea spray and wild sweet orchids. You hear the deep, heavy thud of the ocean crashing against their solid stone bases. They look like two ancient, jagged teeth jutting out of the earth. For the ancient Arawak people who lived here thousands of years ago, these peaks were quite literally the center of their universe. They believed the taller peak, Gros Piton, was the physical embodiment of their god of fire and the sun. The smaller peak represented the moon and the sea. They would paddle their wooden canoes into this exact bay to pray to the giant stone monoliths towering above them. Geologically speaking, these spires are actually the hardened scars of a violent past. They are what scientists call volcanic plugs. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, a massive amount of magma pushed up through the crust of the Earth. But it never fully erupted. Instead, it cooled and hardened right inside the throat of the volcano. Over time, the softer outer shell of the mountain completely washed away in the heavy rain and the crashing sea. The only thing left behind was the solid, diamond-hard core. They stand completely alone today, two towering giants keeping a quiet watch over the Caribbean. But while the pitons are made of dark, hardened lava, our next stop softens the edges completely. We are sailing north through the warm trade winds to find an impossible shoreline in the Bahamas where microscopic creatures have painted the sand a permanent soft pastel pink. When you walk onto a beach, you expect the sand to be white, maybe a pale tan. If you're near a volcano, you might even expect a harsh, ashy black. But on a tiny, quiet island in the Bahamas, the ocean washes onto a shore that breaks all the usual rules. If you step off a small boat onto Harbor Island, the first thing you feel is how unusually cool and fine the ground is beneath your bare feet. The warm, salty breeze comes off the Atlantic, and the water is a perfectly clear, bright turquoise. But where the waves actually meet the land, the wet sand is not brown. It is a soft, unmistakable pastel pink. It almost looks like a trick of the evening light. But if you bend down and scoop up a handful of that wet sand, the color stays. That is because you're not just looking at rocks and crushed coral. The pink tint comes from millions of microscopic marine animals called foraminifera. They are tiny, single-celled organisms that live out in the nearby coral reefs, and they grow these brilliant, bright red and pink shells to protect themselves. When they naturally die, the powerful ocean waves crush their tiny shells into a fine dust. The tide sweeps that red dust onto the shore, mixing it perfectly with the white coral sand. Over thousands of years, the ocean has quietly painted 3 solid miles of this coastline with the crushed remains of an invisible world. It is a peaceful, glowing stretch of land, completely exposed to the bright Caribbean sun. Here, the beauty is laid out right in the open. But our next destination refuses to be seen from the sky. We are flying across the Pacific to the Philippines, to float blindly into the side of a massive, jagged mountain and navigate a wild, ancient river that flows entirely in the pitch black. Rivers usually flow under the open sky. They carve canyons, they flood valleys, and they feed the jungles. But on the Philippine island of Palawan, a massive, powerful river decided to hide. When you leave the bright, humid jungle behind and paddle a small wooden boat toward the jagged cliffs of the St. Paul mountain range, the world suddenly goes quiet. The bright blue water simply vanishes into a gaping black mouth at the base of the rock. As your boat glides inside, the bright tropical heat completely disappears. The temperature drops instantly. You can smell the heavy scent of wet limestone, damp earth, and the thousands of bats hanging completely unseen in the rafters above. The only sound is the gentle, rhythmic splash of your paddle, and the hollow echo of water dripping from the ceiling. You are floating entirely in the dark. For centuries, the indigenous Tagbanua people knew exactly where this cave was, but they absolutely refused to enter it. They believed these dark waters were inhabited by a powerful spirit that guarded the mountain, and that crossing the threshold would bring terrible consequences. Because of that fear, this underground world was left completely untouched by human hands. When modern explorers finally pushed deep into the dark with heavy spotlights, they found out exactly how strange this river really is. It does not just flow quietly through the mountain, it flows directly into the South China Sea because it connects to the ocean. The lower half of this subterranean river is entirely tidal. That means deep inside this pitch-black cavern, miles away from the open sky, the water level still rises and falls every single day with the pull of the moon. You find yourself floating through massive vaulted chambers of stone, some of them so wide they could easily fit an entire cathedral inside. It is a silent, lightless ecosystem, operating on entirely different rules than the jungle just outside. But our journey cannot stay in the dark forever. We are leaving the shadows of Palawan and heading back out into the bright equatorial sun of Indonesia. We are going to navigate a wild, scattered maze of towering karst islands, sitting directly on top of the most chaotic, untouched ocean reef on the planet. If you look at a standard map of the world, the ocean is usually painted as a massive, flat expanse of empty blue. But right on the equator, just off the remote coast of West Papua, the ocean is completely shattered. When you cut the engine on your small wooden boat, the silence is sudden and heavy. The equatorial air is intensely humid, carrying the sharp, distant calls of wild cockatoos. And all around you, rising straight out of the clear water, are hundreds of towering limestone islands. They look like giant, jagged mushrooms, heavily draped in dark green jungle vines. The local people call this maze Raja Ampat. It translates to the Four Kings. According to an ancient local myth, a woman was walking through the thick jungle when she stumbled upon 7 mystical eggs. 4 of those eggs eventually hatched into royalty, becoming the mighty kings who ruled the 4 largest islands in the region. The remaining 3 eggs took a much stranger path, hatching into a ghost, a woman, and a completely silent stone. It is a great story, but the geographical reality of this place is just as magical. This specific scattered archipelago sits precisely where the deep currents of the Pacific Ocean collide with the Indian Ocean. Every single day, those massive underwater rivers sweep enormous amounts of nutrients directly into these shallow, protected channels. Because of that perfect, chaotic collision of currents, Raja Ampat has become the undisputed beating heart of the Coral Triangle. If you slip over the side of the boat into the warm, bright turquoise water, you cross into another universe. This small, isolated pocket of the sea holds over 75% of every single coral species known to exist on our planet. You are floating above the most biodiverse, untouched marine environment on Earth. It is a delicate, perfectly balanced labyrinth. A quiet paradise where the jagged land seems to just float peacefully on a calm, shallow sea. But not all coastlines are this calm or this welcoming. We are leaving the protected, shallow waters of Indonesia and flying far to the east, out over the deep, violent Pacific, to face a brutal wall of razor-sharp cliffs that violently refuses to let anyone set foot on its shores. We like to think that with enough effort, humans can build a road anywhere. We tunnel through mountains, we bridge oceans, but on the northwestern edge of the Hawaiian island of Kauai, the Earth simply refuses to let us in. If you approach this coastline by sea, you immediately feel the power of the water. The Pacific swells here are heavy, dark, and violent. They crash aggressively against the solid rock. The air is thick with cold salt spray, And then you look up. Rising straight out of the foaming ocean is a massive wall of razor-sharp, emerald green cliffs. They tear upward into the clouds, towering as high as 4,000 feet. The valleys between them are so steep and so aggressively carved that they look like deep claw marks dragged right down the side of the island. This is the Pali coast. In the Hawaiian language, it literally translates to the cliffs. Today, there are absolutely no roads here. You cannot drive to it. You cannot easily hike through it. It is an impenetrable, vertical fortress. But hundreds of years ago, ancient Polynesian navigators didn't see a terrifying wall. They saw a home. Despite how brutal and unforgiving this landscape looks, early Hawaiians actually built thriving villages hidden deep inside these isolated valleys. They braved the deadly, towering winter swells in small wooden canoes just to reach the narrow strips of beach. Once inside, they climbed the steep, muddy slopes and carved intricate stone terraces directly into the cliff walls to grow taro root. They lived for centuries, entirely cut off from the rest of the world, protected by the very rock that makes this place so dangerous. The coastline you see today is actually a massive scar. It is the fractured edge of an ancient, extinct volcano that partially collapsed into the sea millions of years ago. Since then, millions of years of heavy rain and relentless ocean waves have been sharpening its edges into blades. It is a violent, dramatic landscape that violently rejects the modern world. But the ocean doesn't always carve the earth with such aggression. Sometimes, it wears the stone down into something perfectly smooth. For our next chapter, we are traveling across the globe to the warm, quiet waters of the Seychelles, to walk on a soft, secluded beach where massive rocks look like they were carefully arranged by the hands of giants. When you look at most tropical islands, they are usually born in one of two ways. They are either violently pushed up from the ocean floor by volcanoes, or they are slowly, quietly built by coral. But out in the middle of the Indian Ocean, there is an island that was not built by the sea at all. It was left behind. As you walk down the dirt paths on the island of La Digue, the air smells sweet and heavy, carrying the scent of wild vanilla plantations. You step out from the dark shade of the tall palm trees and onto the powdery sand of Anse Source d'Argent. The water here is perfectly calm, a pale, warm turquoise that barely ripples against the shore. But your eyes are not drawn to the water. They are pulled to the stones. Scattered all along the shoreline are massive, smooth boulders. They are absolute giants, some towering 3 stories high above the shallow tide. They look completely out of place. It looks as if someone carefully carried them here and arranged them by hand, balancing them perfectly against each other. The truth of how they got here is an incredible piece of geographical history. These rocks are not volcanic. They are solid granite. That is a heavy, dense type of stone you usually only find on massive continental landmasses, not on tiny islands in the middle of the sea. That is because the Seychelles are actually the scattered crumbs of a forgotten world. Millions of years ago, when the ancient supercontinent of Gondwana tore apart, India drifted north and Madagascar drifted south. This tiny cluster of granite mountains was left stranded right in the middle of the shifting ocean. The giant boulders you see on the beach today are simply the highest peaks of a sunken continent. Over countless centuries, the heavy tropical rain and the ocean winds have slowly sanded down their rough edges, carving them into perfect, smooth curves. When you press your hand against the stone, it feels deeply warm from the sun. It is a quiet, heavy landscape. You are quite literally walking through the beautiful, sun-drenched graveyard of an ancient Earth. Here, the ground feels solid, massive, and undeniably real. But for our next destination, reality begins to bend. We are leaving the warm islands of the Indian Ocean and climbing high into the Andes of South America, searching for a massive, desolate landscape where the ground completely vanishes, transforming into a flawless, infinite mirror that swallows the horizon entirely. Sometimes, the world is so vast that our senses simply stop working. We lose our sense of up, down, and distance. High in the thin, cold air of the Bolivian Andes, there is a place where the Earth decides to disappear. When you first drive out onto the Salar de Uyuni, it feels like you've reached the end of the world. It's a massive, flat expanse of white salt, stretching for 4,000 square miles. It is so level and so large that NASA uses this exact spot to calibrate their satellites from space. For most of the year, the ground is a dry, cracked crust that crunches loudly under your boots. The air is crisp and silent, but then the rains arrive. A thin, shallow layer of water, just a few inches deep, collects on top of the salt. Because the ground is so perfectly flat, the water doesn't flow. It just sits there. And in that moment, the entire landscape transforms into a flawless, infinite mirror. When you stand in the middle of it, the horizon simply vanishes. The white clouds above are reflected perfectly beneath your feet. If you look out into the distance, you can't tell where the sky ends and the ground begins. It feels like you're walking on air, floating in a blue and white void. Local Aymara legend has a much more emotional explanation for this place. They say the mountains surrounding the flats were once giant people. The story goes that the mountain Tunupa was betrayed by her husband, and as she lay down in grief, her flowing tears and breast milk mixed together, drying into the massive white plains we see today. The scientific reality is a bit more grounded, but no less epic. Over 40,000 years ago, this entire plateau was part of a giant prehistoric lake. As the climate shifted and the water slowly evaporated, it left behind a thick, solid layer of salt and lithium. Today, this white desert contains nearly half of the entire world's supply of lithium, the very stuff that powers the batteries in our phones and cars. It is a silent, confusing, and beautiful trick of perspective. But while the salt flats of Bolivia use a thin layer of water to create an infinite mirror, our next stop uses no water at all. We are crossing back to the island of Madagascar to navigate a forest made not of trees, but of thousands of razor-sharp limestone needles that would tear any intruder to pieces. Nature usually invites us in. It gives us soft grass to walk on or gentle rivers to follow. But on the western edge of Madagascar, the land has grown a set of teeth. To get to the heart of the Tsingy de Bemaraha, you have to leave every comfort behind. The heat here is dry and relentless, reflecting off a landscape that looks less like a forest and more like a massive gray graveyard of stone. As you start to climb, you realize very quickly that you can't just reach out and grab onto the rocks for balance. Every single surface, every tower, every spire has been sharpened into a razor-thin needle. The local Malagasy people gave this place its name for a very practical reason. Tsingy translates to where one cannot walk barefoot. If you were to slip here, the rock wouldn't just bruise you, it would cut you like a knife. This jagged fortress was created by a perfect, slow-motion disaster. About 200 million years ago, this entire region was a massive bed of limestone at the bottom of the sea. Over time, the earth rose, and the groundwater began to eat away at the stone from the inside out. Tropical rains finished the job, carving deep, vertical grooves into the rock until only these terrifying needle-like peaks remained. But even in a place this hostile, life has found a way to hide. Deep in the narrow, dark canyons between the stone needles, the air is cool and damp. These tight spaces act as a natural defense system. Rare lemurs, like the white Deccan's sifaka, leap effortlessly from one razor-sharp peak to the next. They move through this stone maze with a grace that seems impossible, protected from predators who simply cannot follow them into the blades. It is a world built on defense. A beautiful, jagged cage. Here, the stone has been sharpened by the rain. But for our final destination, we are heading to the dense jungles of Vietnam to find a place so vast and so hidden that it has its own weather, its own forests, and a scale so massive it wasn't even discovered by the modern world until a few years ago. We spent centuries believing that every corner of our map had been colored in, that there were no more lost worlds left to find. But in the deep jungles of central Vietnam, the Earth was hiding something so big, it's hard to believe we missed it for so long. To get to the entrance of Hang Son Doong, you have to trek for days through thick, humid brush and cross remote rivers. In 1990, a local man named Ho Can was out hunting when he stumbled upon a massive opening in a limestone cliff. He heard a terrifying roar of water and felt a powerful, cold wind screaming out from the dark. He was so spooked that he left and couldn't find the entrance again for almost 20 years. When he finally led a team of explorers back in 2009, they realized why the wind was so strong. They weren't just looking at a cave. They were looking at a subterranean universe. As you rappel down 80 meters into the dark, the first thing you feel is the scale. The main passage is so wide and so tall that you could fly a Boeing 747 through it without clipping a wing. The Roar Hokan herd was a fast-moving underground river that still tears through the limestone today. But the most surreal moment happens a few miles inside. The roof of the cave collapsed long ago, creating two massive skylights. Because the cavern is so deep and so large, it actually creates its own weather. Clouds form inside the cave and float through the passages, trapped by the rock. Underneath these patches of light, an entire ancient jungle has grown, hundreds of feet below the surface of the earth. There are monkeys, flying foxes, and rare birds living in a forest that has never seen a human road. Standing there, in the quiet, damp air, looking at trees growing toward a sky they can barely see, you realize that the most fake-looking places on our planet aren't the ones we imagine. They are the ones that have been here all along, waiting in the dark. From the glowing shores of the Maldives to the crystal mirrors of Bolivia, our world is far stranger than any fiction we could write. We just have to be willing to look a little deeper. It is easy to feel like the world has become smaller. We see these places on our screens, in photos, and in fleeting clips, and we convince ourselves we've seen it all. But as we've seen over the last hour, the tropics are more than just postcards. They are living, breathing reminders that nature still holds secrets, places where gravity, chemistry, and time have conspired to create landscapes that shouldn't exist. And yet, they do. They remind us that there is still so much mystery left to protect. If you enjoyed this journey across the planet, do me a favor, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me keep these documentaries going and allows us to explore even more of these hidden corners together. I'm curious, though, which of these 25 locations look the most unreal to you? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, keep looking for the wonder in the world. I'll see you in the next one.